Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to today's Trade Mission event. This is day 3 of the ConnectEO Australian Trade Mission. Our focus today is maritime and business skills. So our program today is full of a number of exciting speakers from various places around Australia. We also have a number of opportunities to do networking, and I'd like to start off by an acknowledgement of country, which is a tradition that we have in many parts of Australia. So just as we start, I'd like you to take a moment wherever you are in the world today and think about the nearest garden or place where there is some soil around you. We and all of life on Earth owes itself to the fact that we have soil, that we have sunlight, that we have air and weather patterns. All of these things in the world around us are part of what the Aboriginal Australians, the Indigenous First Nations people of Australia, refer to as country. Country is vital for all beings, whether they're humans, whether they're parts of the animal kingdom, plant kingdom, fungi kingdom, bacteria, or viruses. And it is through country that life is sustained and that we as humans are able to facilitate the work that we do and make sure that we are able to have meaningful lives that we can enjoy with people, with friends, and to do the things that bring us meaning. So I'd like to acknowledge that in Sydney, Australia, I'm on the lands of the Tharawal First Nations people, the tribe that has existed here where I am for tens of thousands of years before me. They have interacted with the land, air, water, and with each other with a very rich culture, and today I'm very thankful for the connection of country that they have maintained and that I have the insights into, and I'd like to encourage you to just take a moment to be grateful for the relationship with the environment that you have wherever you are on the lands of First Nations people, wherever you are in the world. I have the pleasure now of introducing you. First of all, I'll go through some housekeeping. Thank you very much. We're very grateful that you've taken the time to join us in today's meeting. If you have any technical issues or other queries at any point, please use the Zoom chat feature. I will be able to assist you through there. We're very grateful if you could please keep your camera and mic off during the speaking sessions. However, during the networking sessions that we have scattered across today, we fully encourage you to turn your mic and audio on and participate fully. If you have any questions for our speakers today, please don't wait until the end. Pop them into the chat function of Zoom at any point and we'll make sure that they reach our speakers. I apologize for any puppy noises or any puppy chasing that my mother does in the background or my dog's barking. And I now have the pleasure of introducing you to our first speaker. So we have with us here the amazing David Lucido. So David is Managing Director of Sentient Hubs, an advanced decision support platform that solves complex multi-factor problems through systems thinking, collaboration, and automation. Sentient Hubs is a cloud-based platform for integrated simulation and system-wide optimization, addressing the need to accurately model and account for the cumulative and cascading impacts of decisions across economic, environmental, and social dimensions. David's vision to create a collaborative modeling platform to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and address demand for science-based environmental, social governance, or ESG, by stimulating cumulative impacts has produced a breakthrough innovation for global to local impact. Sentient Hubs has done a lot of work in maritime and marine, and I'm sure his presentation will be of much interest to many of you. So without further ado, welcome David.
Thank you very much for your welcome, Roshni, and the invitation to share today. And thank you, Brendan and team. I'll just start my video there. Everything okay? Good to go?
Wonderful.
Okay. So the introduction actually provides a good executive summary of what we're doing at a high level and why. Probably worth sharing a little bit about our history to understand how we came to develop this capability, and then speak to some examples, some use cases of the application of this technology in the maritime space, and then have any questions, take any questions as appropriate. So about 5 years ago, I was working with the University of Western Australia, and I was doing some consulting work for a company or an entity called the Centre for Water Research. And CWR had essentially, they'd spent 30 years developing some quite incredible science around hydrodynamic models for lakes, estuaries, near coastal, but essentially they were running very complex simulations and models, everything from global scale WRF weather models right through to wave models, hydrodynamic models, sediment transport, and that was the academic area of interest. The vision that the professor at the time had hit some frustration points as far as the ability to improve results through what I call daisy chaining or coupling diverse models or simulations that are not designed to talk to each other. So he employed our Lee Goodyear, who is now our CIO CTO, and essentially they dedicated 10 years. These are software engineers. They spent 10 years developing a framework to automate and manage very complex, I'll call them technical workflows that were really holding back the scientists from doing their more analytical or interpretive work. So what was previously taking a team of PhDs, 9, 10, 11 months to set up and configure one model, through the software that was developed, they were able to get that down to days. When I acquired this quite incredible software, there were still some constraints that I thought if we could overcome, we could really improve outcomes for society and the environment in general, much more broadly. And so what my questions were to Lee, who unfortunately is not on the call now, but he'd be happy to take any technical questions if you have any. But I saw the opportunity of saying, if we could apply what I'll call the engine, it's not really an engine, but these concepts to other types of models, not just environmental models. So what if we could couple or daisy chain a climate model or a flood model with a population model or a transport model or a trade model? And so essentially that was my first question. And the second thing, the system that Lee had developed was very powerful. However, it was constrained in that it was server-based, and it was being run at the time very powerfully on supercomputers at the university. But it was because of the let's say the compute weight of the jobs, it was essentially it was only able to run around a domain. So it could be a bay or a port or a dam, but it couldn't do kind of, my ambition was to say, can we see every ocean, every ship, every supply chain at the same time? And so part of the answer was well, not at the moment, but essentially with the economics and cloud computing, the changes that were emerging, what that gave us was a goal to work towards. And essentially 5 years later, we now have an integrated modelling framework that is entirely vendor agnostic, model agnostic, and I'll define model actually because models can mean different things to different people. So we can take in everything from an Excel spreadsheet to perhaps a more complicated machine learning model or a script, right through to the most complex numerical, mathematical models just as easily. So essentially, we have an integrated modelling hub that is model agnostic. It treats models as data sources and allows these models to couple together to solve bigger problems dynamically and what I describe as system of systems. And this ability allows us to, for the first time, see cumulative and cascading effects. If you move population up or adjust a climate scenario, some macro driver, how does that affect downstream domains and environments? So we now have a live cloud-based system that is secure. We're focusing on critical infrastructure as a start. Shipping, ports, roads, so long supply chains, power, so national energy simulator, and water as three primary areas of focus. And water, we've just demonstrated quite a breakthrough. We've created a linked into the entire Murray-Darling, or actually I should qualify that through New South Wales, essentially a framework for vertical upstream to downstream model coupling, or some people call them digital twins, but this is well beyond any built BIM model. This essentially allows the BIM model, the built environment, to be affected by the forces, whether it's wind speed from one direction or wave impact or inundation or geotech. So that allows us to see the impact of changing environment on an existing asset, or if we're planning a new port or a new road or a new city, we can see how might that new infrastructure affect the environment. So I'm just providing a bit of a backdrop because of the breadth of the people we have on the call today. So that's been we're not a large company, but we're essentially in our small way trying to showcase what's possible. One of the really other important things before I actually get into the presentation is that we are 100% convinced that no one company, no one technology company or university department or agency or hyperscaler can resolve for the complexity that we're all living within. And so we're seeing hundreds, billions of dollars being invested in many, many amazing areas, and great innovations are emerging. But my argument is that no one by themselves can resolve for this, for the type of challenges we've really got. So our approach is to say, how can we do this through collaboration? So rather than me having to know or determine the specific model required, essentially whether that person is someone out of Cambridge or Tel Aviv or Singapore or Australia, we can bring them together to essentially plug in together to solve a higher level problem. I'll pause there. Was there a question? I heard a little binging. Or is that my time to stop?
Not at all. Please continue. That was somebody new joining the meeting, so
okay.
Feel free to keep going.
Okay. So I'll just so that's the background. So I'll see if I can just. I'm not sure if I can hide this somewhere. And I'll keep going. So really the breakthrough part is being able to understand model consequence across domains at everything from global scale right down to hyperlocal. So I know there's the topic here is Earth observations, and there are many different techniques and technologies used for this at different resolutions. And what this hub does at a level, so Sentient Hubs is able to bring together and essentially couple these different technologies and manage it in a highly automated way, so that a decision maker is able to just move sliders, let's say, and see effects. So we make it a lot easier to understand strategic decisions. So we talk about strategic decision support. Can I just check, can everyone see the slide there with the little pictures on it?
Yep.
Okay. So I typically, rather than talking about technology, I lead with, you know, questions when we're dealing mainly with state and federal governments. And there are, essentially they find it hard to understand cumulative and cascading impacts and trigger points about when should we invest, when should we be divesting, how do we actually quantify costs across not just economic but also environmental and social impacts. And then thirdly, there are all these so-called black swan or externalities. Could be adverse weather, climate change, a trade war, a war in the Ukraine, that affect our local markets and environments. How can we bring those into the model, into as a variable dynamically that you can flex? So this is the big shift here, is that it's not about a snapshot in time. It's really about understanding dynamically how the world is changing around us. So often big decisions are being made off data and reports that are a report maybe 6 months ago or a week ago, and I'm arguing that was out of date the day it was published. So the point of this slide is to ask questions like, just to help people understand, it's multidimensional. So how much might an increase in population affect not just demand for power, but power, water, health, congestion, air quality, so air chemistry, land values and infrastructure priorities. Sorry, let's jump to a slide there. I don't know what it's doing there. It's doing something silly. Bear with me. Just had a little slideshow. Okay, can everyone see the slide anymore? Is that gone now?
It's stopped.
Okay. Share screen. I'll just share this.
Yep, so we can see your PowerPoint window.
Okay. So essentially, it's not just about, say, a macro factor like population growth. It could be climate change. And I'll actually jump across to the maritime, the marine context for people that are interested in that, because how this might apply there. And so the point is, it could have applications for maritime supply chains or port infrastructure or near coastal developments and risk of natural, in terms of natural adverse weather and rising sea levels. There can be defense applications. There can be island nations which are very vulnerable to various shifts. So the key here, I'll see if I can make it a bit bigger for everybody. Apologies. Okay. I'm assuming you can still see that, Roshan?
Yes.
Okay. Is the key thing that's probably worth sharing is not the specific model or the data source. what we really look for is context. So what we bring is essentially a modelling hub, an integrated modelling hub, but we don't determine or prescribe the question or the context or the flex variables or the technology that's going, that the sensors that are out there. But what we can do is daisy chain and couple and automate the workflows. So in the top left, you can see a WRF, a global weather model, but that's too high resolution. It's too coarse for use in a local, you know, at a local level. So we have to be able to couple that to a wave model. And so rather than having separate models running and executed separately, we're able to push wind into waves at that boundary and essentially have wind-driven waves. So they're actually starting to behave a lot more realistically. And then we can push that energy down into the water column to affect hydrodynamics. And obviously then that can pick up, you know, sediment and move that around as appropriate. Now, the powerful thing here is that we're able to then not just have a very good model, an integrated environmental model from top of atmosphere down to bottom of ocean. What we're able to do is bring in an asset. So that means we could have a ship or a submarine or an offshore wind farm, and that asset can be moving in 6 degrees of freedom. And rather than it being treated as a static piece, we can actually push energy into it and see how resilient it is. When will it break? What will it withstand? Under what directional forces? And how old is it? What fatigue? And how do we, let's say it's a wind farm, how do we optimize the blades and everything proactively? So if we can anticipate solar radiation, if you can anticipate wind speed and direction, you can now start to, just like the airliners use the jet streams to, you know, to their advantage to reduce fuel and time, there's a massive opportunity to reduce bunker, for example, huge amount of pollution every year through the big container ships, where we can anticipate you know, across oceans, we can see every ship, every ocean, and the dynamics between them. And that's one good example of what we call proactive adaptive route optimization. So that's a really quite important point. It doesn't have to be all offshore. It could be how changing conditions are affecting near coastal systems in terms of accretion and you know, erosion and risk of inundation under various climate scenarios. Are there any questions so far? Otherwise, I'll show you some examples of the front end, that example case examples. I can take a couple of questions. I'll pause there. Sorry, Russia, because I can't see anybody.
No worries. So does anybody have any questions at this stage? Please speak now or forever hold your peace. We absolutely welcome questions here. So if you'd like to inquire about anything, if there's an idea that you'd love to float or something you'd like to clarify, please do jump in.
Okay.
All right, David, let's have a look at some examples, but please, if anybody does have any questions, do pop them in the chat and we can come to them quite quickly.
Thank you. So really, I've just been scrolling through a couple of slides to help. For me, it's more important to communicate the why and some of the conceptual, because once you understand that, then the way that you apply it, each of you will have a different context and you'll fit in within a bigger picture. Our goal is just to create awareness that this capability is available. It's working and it's real, and essentially help to apply this in a way that's, you know, improves outcomes for society. So this is an example. I'll just show you a couple of examples now. This example kind of straddles maritime and marine, where we've got in port environments, a whole range of different stakeholders, and it's quite typical actually for most infrastructure. So initially we were asked a question around, there was some land coming up in Rouse Head here on the in the top right there, and the question was asked of us, could you make it easy for me as a land or a property manager to understand my options around land use? And we said, yes, we can, but we can actually do a lot better than, a lot more than that. So the types of questions now that the port can answer extend well beyond a property-led question. So it could be, how might that particular choice of land use affect congestion on the port, traffic congestion off the port, SOx and NOx as far as air chemistry and dwell times on a very sensitive local community in Fremantle, noise levels, economic, environmental. So my point here is, depending on who you are, if you're an environmental scientist, you look at it one way, a community stakeholder looks at it another way, an engineer or the property guy. The bottom line is that just maximizing for rent doesn't necessarily provide the best answer in a holistic context against environmental and social impact. So this allows clients to move sliders and understand consequence. So here's another example where we've got a map of the US energy grid, and essentially they are able to spin up a hurricane off in the Gulf of Mexico, and push essentially a flood up into the bathymetry, into topography. So all the EO stuff fits in there. So this is taking synthesized historical data, real-time sensor data, and also synthetic or modeled data, and unifying it, and then allowing the lay person to within certain tram lines to dynamically flex those and rerun those under different conditions. So, for example, there's a lot of very emotional, principled, positions around energy mix, and so rather than having one kind of who's got the loudest voice or the biggest checkbook arguments, what we're trying to talk about around decision support is say, what if we were to reduce gas dependency by X%? But rather than just looking at that by itself, we can say, how might that change affect the price of power at the household level and the available electricity, the reliability and stability of the grid as well? So these are use cases where it becomes a creative process of figuring out what's the big question, what's the context, and what's the relevant data to start to. So this would include meteorological, ocean information, flood models, topography, GIS. So it's as much as we can get, we're pulling in. Here's an example again for South Florida, where the question was asked, the ability to essentially be able to drag and drop and change easily climate scenarios against infrastructure on the coast over time. And the point here is that in fact, very few organizations, even most of the consulting firms, they don't have teams of climate scientists. And even if they did, it's still not easy just to spin up and run and rerun these climate scenarios over a different part of the world or a different geography or postcode in this case. That's the sort of level of automation and elegance that's been built in. So essentially the user defines the question and the way they want it to look, and we're able to bring in the relevant model, simulation, data, source, satellite imagery, soil moisture. That's another good application, actually, bushfires and things like that, where again, lots of incredible modeling in a fragmented way. But if you can start to bring together, or instead of making assumptions at the boundary conditions, essentially that can be a relevant model feeding into that. So it's more, we're getting a better approximation of real world rather than, finger in the wind or best guess. Any questions along these lines? So I'm sort of shifting a little bit here. Keep going. Here, what we've got is the extension of a lot of organizations, or pretty much everybody, struggles with what they call scope 3 emissions, which is the long supply chain. So what this is an extension on the left here of the map, is Fremantle Port, the port that I was showing you earlier. But those containers might originate in China or in Bangladesh, come through Singapore in transshipment, arrive into Fremantle, then get put onto trucks and driven to distribution centres. So this allows us to see across that entire long supply chain, you know, how might adverse weather. So if we again go back to maritime marine, we can actually understand how weather events might slow down, disrupt, or affect schedules in a very dynamic way. Some of the people on this call may be familiar with AIS shipping data and other initiatives using blockchain. All of those feed into this higher order abstraction. This is, I talk about essentially, you know, it's not a black swan event. We've got a flock of black swans. So I think that's probably a good place to pause, given, just trying to see if there's any other slides that are relevant to the group here, but otherwise I'll happy to take some questions.
Thanks, David. That's really, yeah, it's still inspiring. It still makes me go wow every time I see you do that. You mentioned at one start, like, you know, kind of going beneath the ocean surface. Have you got any other comments around, you know, those kind of applications, and, you know, what sort of models start to slot into what you're doing?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really right now we've Sentient Hubs has just been nominated just over the last couple of weeks. There's a major project in Western Australia called Westport, which you'd be familiar with. We have been nominated as the scientific modelling hub for Cockburn Sound. So, and that's connecting. It's called an ecosystem, integrated ecosystem model, and it's never been done. So we're connecting the ROMS ocean model, that CHARI at UWA. So we're taking ocean models. We're taking near coastal hydrodynamic models. We're taking the freshwater, the Swan River, and we're integrating various scientific models that are the BMT2 flow model, that is a commercial proprietary model, and we're able to essentially allow the model coupling in a way, and model management in a way that instead of taking a year to come up with one dimension of this, essentially they're able to run scenarios 6 times a day, or as many times a day as they want, to be honest. It's not constrained. So that's something that's quite significant, that brings together ocean modeling, but rather than just looking at the underwater by itself, what we're doing is we're generating better understanding of potential conditions in advance of the sensor by coming up with nesting global, regional, local models. And instead of just having points of validation, we're actually having a full mesh between the weather model and that 2-dimensional, let's say the plane where it hits the water, and then pushing that energy down into the water column, and depending on the bathymetry there in Cockburn Sound, which is quite interesting, it's got all sorts of effects, satiating effects. This allows us to see those and then adjust variables. So variables might include how might increasing population increase shipping frequency, shipping vessel sizes. Does that need more dredging? What will dredging do to that? How do we track plumes? What does that do for amenity and social impact? How does that affect port side infrastructure? congestion on roads, SOx, NOx, etc. Probably going to get pretty noisy here. Got all the kids getting back from their day at the beach, but I hope that makes a bit of sense. Brendan, does that help understand?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. Yeah, interested in that underwater environment. Really interesting in all the things you're doing, and great to see you involved in those kind of big projects. Just for a couple of other folks, like we're talking about stuff which is West Australia based, not too far out of the metro area, all those kind of areas that David's talking about, Coburn Sound and so forth. Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, David. That was amazing. Really, really insightful. Very, very interesting. So at this point, we're going to move on to our next speaker. I am very excited to introduce to you Trent from Geosciences Australia. So to give you a little bit of background on Trent, oops, sorry, I've just misplaced my internet window, which had there we go. All right. So to give you, let me just ask you to pull your video up, Trent. There we go. So Trent has an amazing beard that he's been working on diligently for a little while. He is from Geosciences Australia, and he is a digital leader with a diverse background working in a range of industries, including online, retail, finance, ICT services, and government. So the common thread through Trent's career has been his passion to drive adoption of exciting technologies. In his role with Digital Earth Australia, Trent is responsible for building partnerships with industry, government, and research organisations to ensure that Australia uses Earth observation data to make smarter decisions to support a sustainable environment, a resilient society, and a strong economy. So, Trent, welcome on board. We're thrilled to have you join us today.
Right, thanks a lot, Roshni. And let me just give my apologies for sending that bio through at after 5 o'clock today. So well done.
In the end.
We got there. Let me just share screen. Hopefully you are seeing. Nope. Hang on, let me try that again. Okay. Can you just confirm that you're seeing a slide deck for me, Roshni?
Unfortunately, I can't confirm that, Trent.
No.
Wait. Almost. Yes. Hang on. I see 25 billion in. Yes. Now I see.
There we go. Too many screens. I am one of those unfortunate people who has a few many screens going at the same time. Look, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. Yeah, look, I'm really excited to be here to talk a little bit about Digital Earth Australia and I guess our more coastal and marine focused products. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what Digital Earth Australia is about, I'm sure you're very familiar with the likes of Landsat and Sentinel and all of those kinds of things. But in a nutshell, Digital Earth Australia exists to unlock as much value as we possibly can from these routine observing satellite operations such as Landsat and Sentinel programs, and gain as much insight out of those data sets as we possibly can. So that obviously leads us to do a lot of stuff on land, but we do have a few things that we do on sea as well. So our goal is to take all of the raw data that comes in from these satellites and remove as much of the noise that we know exists in them as possible. You know, there's a lot of clouds and cloud shadows, differences occurring based on terrain conditions and all sorts of things like that. We try and remove as much of that noise as possible so that we have as high quality statistical time series data set as we possibly can get out of a series of satellite images. And the goal here really is to reduce the risk for Australia from natural hazards, make sure that we're monitoring change as effectively as we can in order to either protect Australia's natural environment or alternatively take advantage of that environment in order to grow Australia's economy and make us a productive and competitive economy on the global scale. So in terms of our coastal and marine insights that we've developed, we've got a few here. I've just got a little bit of a snapshot of the Sea, Ocean and Coast page on our website. Feel free to jump on after this and check out our website at dea.ga.gov.au. The way that we go about developing all of the data sets that we do develop, I think is a really important part of our identity. We are a government-funded organisation, and so it's very important that we make sure that we are maintaining the trust that people expect a government organisation to provide them. So making sure that everything that we do is scientifically robust, appropriately validated, is very important to us, because by having a high quality data set and data collection that a lot of people consider to be world leading in terms of quality, we are in a position to maintain that trust. Another really important part of the way that we go about developing everything that we do is that it's all ultimately for the greater good. So we want to make sure that we're communicating our science effectively so people understand what we're doing, and make everything that we do, all of our data, all of our scientific methodologies, our source code, everything that helps us to gain these insights, make that available so you can also use that code. And the goal there is that we're trying to drive as much collaboration around these methods that are being used as possible. We don't want everyone to be fighting to create the same wheel. We want them creating the next wheel and the one after that. So trying to build that environment of collaboration is very important to us. And again, finally, making sure that the products that we do deliver are scalable. We do, in terms of the work that we do for our Australian government partners, a lot of it does tend to be on a continental scale. So the entirety of Australia, we need a consistent methodology to make measurements and deliver some sort of insights about that. So making sure that we are developing patterns that mean that we can deliver operational, reliable products is very important, and within reason, we do as much as we can to make all of the work we do in that space, working on cloud platforms and everything, as open as we possibly can, with some caveats due to security and all of those kinds of awkward bits. So in terms of characterizing the coastal zone, our focus is really on mangrove salt marshes, intertidal mudflats, and mapping coastlines. At this point, all of the products that I'll be talking about here have been developed using Landsat, so they have a resolution of 30 meters, but there is an intention moving forward of incorporating Sentinel-2. The great thing about the Landsat data set is that there were some very smart people a very long time ago that said, let's launch stuff into the sky that takes pictures routinely. So we have that over 30-year archive that gives us a really good time history, which is hugely advantageous when it comes to looking at how past trends might put us in a position where we can identify what might happen next. Okay, it wouldn't be a DEA presentation without some random pretty pictures. That's meant to be playing over and over again, but it isn't. But one of the questions I guess I wanted to pose here, and one of the patterns in code that we make free and openly available, is what if rather than just looking at things in terms of a time history and sorting all of the images that we have by a time history to look at them, we sorted them by something different. And in this case, we've utilized another data set, being a tidal height data set, to understand what the tidal height was at the time that an observation was taken. And so we've resorted our collection based on that information rather than on looking at it chronologically, and you can see very clearly the tidal pattern, and you can get a sense of the shape of the intertidal zone in this case as well, which is a really cool thing to look at. But that's not why we're here, are we? We're here to gain more insights. But the wonderful thing about pulling all of this information together is with the addition of some ground truthing information to understand the actual state of affairs in particular situations, we've been able to develop a product called the intertidal extent model, and beyond that as well, the intertidal digital elevation model. So by using this time series of data and seeing how things change consistently over time against that tidal data set, we've been able to produce a digital elevation model in an area that is notoriously hard to map. Either you've got big ships going out and collecting seabed information, or alternatively, you have planes or other aerial instruments flying and collecting LiDAR information, but obviously that's impacted by the tide at the time when these things are being taken. So by pulling this together, we've been able to gain some information that is otherwise really hard to get. Just some more pretty pictures. This is from the Pilbara region. This is not actually that steep. We've advanced the elevation quite a bit just to give you a sense of what this looks like. But it gives you a sense of the kind of thing that you can see. And for some reason, this is not going to the next slide. There we go. But there's another one for you, just in terms of the level of quality of the shape of the coast that we've been able to get by looking at this time history of water extents in those open satellite images. And again, why can't I go to the next slide? So that gives us one snapshot by using the entire 30-year archive of information. But what we know is that it's not that simple, that coastlines are not static. They're in some parts of the world extremely dynamic, and so it's really important that we continue to increase the understanding that we have of how all of these systems are working, and that is why we have developed another product that some of you might be familiar with called DEA Coastlines, where we've used the archive of information to give an annual snapshot of our best estimation of where the coastline was in any particular year from 1988 all the way through to 2020. 2020 at this point, no, 2021 I believe is done now, so up to 2021. So by looking at this, we're able to start to understand better where there are parts of the coast that are growing and where there are parts of the coast that are receding. Of course, this is very, very relevant for coastal communities, particularly those that live very, very close to the water. You can see in this bottom image here, we have a nice, slightly growing coastline on the right-hand side here, but it is starting to get a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit close to some of these houses on the left-hand side there. So this has all been done across the entire Australian coastline, and it's used over 58,000 validation points in order to compare actual information about where the coastline was compared to what we observed in the satellite images, and there's been a very high correlation, and in fact we've been able to achieve sub-pixel accuracy, so much less than 30 meters in a lot of areas of the Australian coastline with this. And a big important part of this as well was the co-design process that we took. We worked with people in these areas. If this was going to be a data set that was of use, then it was really important to us that those areas where frankly there is the most coastal variability, particularly around urban environments, that they were involved in the process, and they had an opportunity to provide validation data and provide us feedback through the process of developing it. So this is a really important part of how we go about doing our work as well. I mentioned the importance of that long-term data set that we have, where we can look all the way back to 1988 in order to understand trends from history and start to use that to predict other things that might happen in the future. So CoreLogic, who are an organisation working in our property industry and valuation industry, primarily used Digital Earth Australia coastlines in their modelling, and basically they looked at those past trends of how the coast has moved to make predictions about where the coastline might be in 30 years' time. And as a result of that, combined with some other risk factors like changes in sea level and increase in other hazards found, and published that they believe that there is $25 billion worth of Australian properties that are exposed to high coastal risk, which has the potential to have all sorts of impacts on values of those properties, and obviously can be quite concerning to some people. It also gives governments and other bodies the opportunity to think about how they might be able to mitigate against those risks well ahead of where we're going to be potentially in 30 years, according to this report. I mentioned the important factor that for us, yes, we build data sets that have insights, but for us it's as much about building the pattern that other people can take and build upon as anything else. So there has been a lot of interest and uptake in the DEA Coastlines method. So you can see it in the CEOS Coast, and also the Digital Earth Africa programs, and NOAA as well is supporting implementation for the US Eastern Seaboard. Importantly, the Open Data Cube code base that's mentioned on this slide as well, that is the basis of the Digital Earth Australia platform. It is open source and it's all available on GitHub, so get onto it if you're interested. So another area where there is a lot of interest in Australia is in mapping mangrove environments. There are areas of significance, particularly in the northern parts of Australia, where there have been reports of routine mangrove dieback, where mangroves mangroves are basically dying off in particular parts of the Australian coastline. And there have been a lot of reports about this that have been disputed in many cases, and there have been claims that this is just a slow and ordinary trend and those kinds of things. The good thing is the fact that we've got 30 years of data that we can look back at. We're in a position where we can map mangrove environments and give some sort of indicator of the health of those environments, having a better understanding. So dark green is a close forest, so very thick vegetation. The middle green is an open forest, so about 50-50 in terms of water versus vegetation that we're seeing, and then the lighter green is where actually it's not very dense at all. So by looking at this density, we're able to have a time series indicator of mangrove health over time. This is really important to Australia in terms of managing and reporting on the state of environment, and in terms of protecting key wetlands across the country that are of environmental significance. That's a duplicate slide. Look at that. Just in case you wanted to see it one more time. So the final thing I just wanted to say is we are, as I said, all about trying to make it easier to work with satellite imagery. Our focus is on the free and open stuff, but we build those patterns that I spoke about and implement those patterns that have the potential to be applicable and usable using commercial imagery, but equally this is really just the starting point for us in terms of refining the insights that you can get out of satellite imagery. So I really welcome you all to, if you see anything of interest, reach out to us, engage, have a chat. We're always keen to have a chat. But I'd say as well, yeah, getting involved in that open data cube community where we can help to take some of those steps that we know we need to take in order to lift the baseline for everybody. I think that would be a really valuable thing. Understanding the parts of what we do that are commercial and need to be protected, and maybe some of the ones where by sharing a pattern that we've developed, we're helping to drive the entire community forward is really good. So the final thing I just wanted to say is we have a website. It's called DEA Maps. There's a link here. I'm assuming that the slides will be shared. I won't actually go to this now, but the slides no doubt will be shared. Feel free to jump on there and have a look and get a bit of a walkthrough of DEA coastlines and how it works if you're interested. But I should say as well, even our web mapping portal and all of the web services software and what have you that we've developed or extended, all of that is open source as well. So with that, I will stop and say thank you, and we'll see if there's any questions.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for Trent?
Thanks, Brendan, for putting the link in the chat. You're a legend.
All right. Well, Trent, thank you. That was fabulous. Really appreciate you making the time and having such interactive slides with so much useful information for our audience.
No worries. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Very welcome. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, a good friend of mine who has a very new moustache that I'm just not used to at all, Hellen. So Lee is the recipient of the recent Asia Pacific Spatial Information Award for the SIBA GITA Chairs Award. And Lee is basically, he's been around all of the traps in Australia, working for quite a while in very different environments. He's learned a great deal in his time. He commenced studying surveying in the early 1990s, where he joined the Quosco team, travelled to many destinations, including the UK as an engineering surveyor and Darwin as Quosco's Northern Territory manager. Then he returned to Brisbane and became involved in award-winning projects such as the Suncorp Stadium, Chandler Velodrome and Queen's Wharf. Lee then opened his own business, Land Solutions Australia, and afterwards he joined the Spatial Queensland Board and played an active role for many years, culminating as chair. Lee has been on the Surveying and Spatial Sciences National Board, and he's also been on the SIBA, Lee, you might have to remind me what SIBA stands for. Spatial Information Business Association?
Yeah, Spatial Industries Business Association, Rosh, yeah.
Thank you. And Lee encouraged us all to think globally and act locally. So Lee will be talking to us today about business culture in Australia. And please do feel free to put any of your questions in the chat. This will be more of a fireside chat, open, engaging session. So please prepare to get involved and do feel free to turn your camera on and get ready to ask any questions for Lee as well. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thanks, Rosh. And yeah, it'd be great if you did want to show your camera. I understand if you don't want to, but be great to meet you all. I know everyone's sort of joining from all over the world, and yeah, it's my pleasure, Rosh, to help you in this task. So my job, I've known Roshni for quite a long time, Roshav and I, and I'm here to give you a little bit of an insight, I suppose, in terms of the business environment in Australia. What are some of the things that are weighted quite heavily in the way that contracts are awarded, and also you know, a bit of the culture around business in Australia. As I said, what kind of assists you to be successful, I suppose. So here's based on my experience. So I'm just going to run through kind of 8 or 10 things, and I do appreciate some of these might have been covered off by previous speakers, but I'll give you a bit of a start here. Quite often when we first of all, the client base in Australia is there's quite a high amount of we've got 3 levels of government here in Australia. We've got a federal government, and we've got regional governments, which is our states across Australia. We have 8 states, and then we also have a local government. So we've got 3 tiers of government, and all those tiers of government draw quite heavily on spatial to make decisions around obviously managing assets. So you would say government is quite a large consumer of spatial information in Australia, but we also have a growing client base in the private sector. We have quite a number of heavy use of spatial information within the private sector, both in the corporate sector, across the board. So the market, even though compared to, I suppose, traditional markets like US and Europe, is quite small in its size. It's quite dynamic and reliant on spatial data for making its day-to-day decisions. So typically, when we are procured, I suppose, to do work, I'm from a private company, so I'm a private from the private sector. There's usually a number of tests that go through in a more formal sense, especially in government. Government will generally any contract that's sort of worth over $10,000 or $20,000 usually goes through some sort of open procurement process. And there's a number of criteria that generally are fairly heavily relied upon, I suppose, by government in terms of that procurement process. First of all, there's usually an acid test around local content. So people will want to know around equipment that you use or the labour that you're sourcing for your project, they'll want some sort of statement in that procurement around how much local content you're using in your product, and also what you'll do in terms of job creation for some local outcomes in Australia as a result of that project. So that's always one criteria that people are looking at, particularly government, and I'd say that's probably increased a little bit more since COVID, as I think as with disruptions in global supply chains, people are looking to, particularly governments looking to try and help assist local job creation. Another criteria is diversity, and most contracts now, that government contracts, will want some sort of statement around how you're adding to creating a more diverse and inclusive workforce. So that's another statement that they want to know around corporate culture within your organisation, is what your strategy to be encouraging that. Another one is around Indigenous employment, and there's a lot of, there's usually also a clause within any state, particularly state or federal government contractors, how you're looking to provide employment opportunities for Indigenous people within Australia. Another one that's looked upon quite heavily and weighted in government contracts is around quality. And usually you'd be asked to demonstrate to, within your bid or within your project, around how you can demonstrate a quality product. And I would say in the last, there's a couple of levels to that. Some contracts will ask you for a third-party certification of quality within your business. So they may ask you for example, an ISO 9001 quality statement that your organisation meets a quality standard. But the other ways they do that, ensuring quality, is around demonstration of previous projects, and also the qualifications or experience of some of your key personnel. So that's always drawn upon quite heavily within a selection criteria. So there's some of the more, I suppose, formal things that are requested in any contract award, particularly within government contracts. In terms of less formal means, and this is largely, I would say, more so around the private sector engagement opportunities. A lot of it is around reputation and network. And I would say this is probably the most influential way of getting some of the more, larger sort of corporate clients on board. So some of these, in terms of your reputation network, generally they're looking, and the reason for that is quite often a lot of these companies don't have systems in place to broadly advertise. Just like government, I suppose, it's not an open procurement. Generally, what they'll do is have a pool of shortlisted candidates who they know are capable of supporting an outcome within their business, and they'll generally go to meet that I suppose, a competitive type arrangement. Is they'll have a small panel or a small group of consultants or people they will use to source that out. So what you want to do is try and target some of these companies, and quite often ask to be included on their panel or be given an opportunity to bid on their work in a future capacity. So generally in the private sector, that's usually a good way to target an opportunity, is that if you're aware of an opportunity within a company, or you're targeting, say, a large mining company, for example, or a large agriculture company, you'll be asked to, you ask that they consider that you be put on their expression of interest, and they will look to open that opportunity up to you at their next available opportunity. I'm just going through some of my notes here. I do apologise. as I said, I think that it's very important to understand, I suppose, the jurisdictional environment that we have in Australia. Is that much of the, I suppose, the laws and regulations around particularly land and land management happens at a regional level. There are some federal contracts, but generally most contracts around land and land management and generally from a spatial context, I'm not saying all of them are, but you would say probably the largest consumers of land and spatial information are regional governments. So you'll find that basically having a track record in dealing with those regional laws and regulations is quite highly sought after. So in other words, you could be practicing in say New South Wales or Victoria. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Australian geography, but you'll find that people will want to see some sort of experience or expertise around you applying those regional laws with certain types of criteria in your work. And that's not just for surveyors, it's sometimes even at a, say, digital twin level, different state governments are doing different things, even though they're all doing digital twins. So so either formal, I suppose, having a partner that's got, having someone with experience at that regional jurisdictional level is usually highly sought after with contracts. Another thing to understand in Australia is, and I did see we had Digital Globe up there before, the sheer tyranny of distance in Australia is not to be underestimated. It's an enormous country. Geographically, you know, we're the size of Europe, not bigger, pretty much the size of the United States. And what are we, 30 million people now, Rosh? 30 million? So, you know, it's the sheer scale of getting products out into some regional areas shouldn't be underestimated. So if you're working in areas that can be remote, it's not uncommon in Australia to be driving for a couple of days straight to get from A to B. It's a very, very big country. And with that, there's a lot of opportunity as well. Obviously, there's a lot of land to cover. So with generally lesser resources. So there's an opportunity in that as well. But you really do have to have a fair degree of local knowledge, particularly if you're working outside of the cities, around how to do things in some of these regional areas. And a lot of you know, local knowledge can be highly useful in that type of situation. So definitely understanding. Another thing here, obviously, is supply chains. And yeah, Australia's, as I said, even though it's a, you know, globally in terms of a market, it's pretty small fish. You know, we do only have 30 million people, say, and albeit that the quality of that, it is a fairly advanced country in terms of our adoption of technology, because we do have to cover a lot of area with little resources, but it is sometimes difficult with supply chains to Australia, and that's both an opportunity but also a constraint. So you do have to be a little bit, often things take a lot longer to get to Australia than they do other parts of the world. So sometimes you need to be conscious around that Australia is not often a major market for a lot of products, and sometimes it can take, you know, a lot longer to get things to Australia and to operate here. But there is a lot of benefits, and I think to doing business in Australia, there's one thing is that essentially people, if you do a good job and you've got a good reputation, incumbency is generally always looked upon quite favourably. So if you're the incumbent on a contract, you do a good job, you're continually always looking forward, you'll often be looked upon very favourably in terms of moving forward. So I would say generally business is very above board. I wouldn't say there's, so generally it gives a pretty fair opportunity to those who are doing good work in the marketplace. And price can often be overcome as the primary consideration. And that's what I'd kind of say to people, is that if you do have a good product, you do the good things in your business, you deliver a great service, quite often price can be overcome as the primary consideration in a contract award. Obviously, English is spoken very broadly in Australia. Anything other than English is not spoken very broadly in Australia. English speaking countries that do have English as their native language, or a good handle of the English language, it's fairly easy to do business here. Time zone. Australia is ideally suited to as a base for obviously the whole of the Asia Pacific region. You know, we share a time zone with China. We're only an hour or two away from markets in Japan and some of the biggest markets in Southeast Asia. Countries like India are only a couple of hours behind. So, and quite often I've done business. It's a kind of nice fit in the middle, that where I've done business with people in Europe from now onwards, and I do business with people in the United States when I wake up in the morning. So time zone wise, it can be I would say it's probably the best of it's quite good for different parts of the world. As I said, most people in Australia, it does have a very high level of education, particularly in spatial industries. And there's also a culture in Australia of very much embracing new innovation and knowledge 4.0. And I think that's been particularly noticeable for me in the months since COVID, is that people are very much open to new ways of doing business and new innovation coming into Australia, trying to create new outcomes. So particularly, you know, we have some very progressive companies throughout the world, particularly in the agricultural space, in mining, in construction. These are some of the most, I would say, some of the companies that are based in Australia are some of the most progressive in the world in terms of those industries, particularly, yeah, mining and agriculture. Some of the construction industries, Australian companies are some of the leading lights in the world in those areas. So generally speaking, new innovation, smarter ways of doing things are generally very much a topic of and an advantage for people who are looking at. So Rosh, I kind of spoken for about 15, 20 minutes there. I don't know if that's been helpful to people, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lee. I'd now like to invite all of our participants to turn your videos on and please raise any questions or tell us what some of the most insightful things have been in the content that Lee has been sharing with us. Matthias, would you like to go first? Nice headphones.
I don't really have very good questions at the moment, but as you just asked to turn the videos on, so I do wonder if the company is not Australian based, and how do these evaluation criteria regarding using the native population or so on, how would that play out then? Or would we need a local partner for that, or how do you comment?
It's a good question, Matthias. Obviously, it helps having, I would think in that situation, a local partner. It's a bit hard to do it. I would think probably your best bet is to have a local partner in that if that happened to come up on a criteria. I do, Rosh, I'm not sure if there's anything that's established, Matthias, that, you know, overseas company could access that type of thing directly. we could look into that, Rosh, couldn't we?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any services, particularly in geospatial, is probably a bit lesser known, I suppose, in the employment landscape. But I think, Mateus, that the safest way is to try and look for a local partner.
And like Lee mentioned, it is such a small industry. We're always bumping into each other, the same people at conferences, at events, and a great way to meet local partners is to have a look at local conferences. So there's often state conferences within a particular jurisdiction, or there's national conferences, like there's one called Locate. Often I know there's hydrography specific conferences as well, if you're in the sort of maritime hydrography space. So going to those if you can, or looking at the sponsoring organizations or the exhibitors or the speakers, and then just reaching out to have a conversation, or even getting in touch with SSI, which is one of the industry bodies for professionals, or SIBA, which is the industry body representing the industry, so businesses, and attending some online events or offering to speak if they have events coming up that you might be able to add content towards. Those are some great ways to get your name out there and start to meet potential local partners as well.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Brendan.
I was just going to ask on behalf of that. Is there anything noticeably different, do you think, from working with the private sector versus working with governments? That there might be a trick for younger players.
Good question. Government, Brendan, tends to be much more prescriptive in the way that you provide your services. So government will almost tell you what they'll just be a little bit. Well, generally, let's say this, Brendan, that generally a lot of the people that are in procurement in government have some knowledge of geospatial. So they have a much tighter understanding of the process and what you're doing and how you do it. So they tend to ride you a bit harder, if I can use an Australian expression. They tend to be a bit more prescriptive in the way that you offer your services, whereas in the private sector, they kind of say, well, there's a bit more of a degree of freedom, I think, there around particularly how you do it. That's probably my only experience, Brendan, is that government tend to, and it's not always the case, but quite often when you go through a procurement process with government, they'll have someone that has a geospatial background. And quite often when you're procuring to private sector, they actually don't have anyone with a geospatial background.
Interesting. Thanks, Lee.
Daniel, you've got your thinking face on. Do you have a question for Lee?
It may be that I have this face on, but I don't have a question. But thanks a lot for all these insights, Lee. It's very, very interesting.
No problem, Daniel.
Lee, what would be some of the common Australian lingos or expressions that we use in daily life that people in other parts of the world might scratch their heads at and go, what?
Where do we start? Well, the first misconception is you're not going to get eaten by a shark, and you're not going to be taken by a croc, and you're not going to be bitten by a snake. I think I just want to say that straight off the bat. Most people are scared to come to Australia because they'll think they'll die. Not saying that it won't happen, but it's very remote. Okay, so that's the first misconception, is that it's a safe place to do business, right? Let's just say that, both from a personal safety perspective as well as a commercial perspective. It takes a little bit of work to get established. Look, I think you'll find, just like anywhere, I'm sure it's no different to other markets around the world. But you know, I think, yeah, I don't have any pearls of wisdom around language, Ross. You know, there's many Australian. My accent is very thick. I do apologise if you can't understand me. I'm from Queensland. We often get a hard time from people in New South Wales and Victoria who speak a bit more better English than I do. But yeah, generally, yeah, it's a really, yeah, accommodating place to do business. Everyone's, let's say everyone plays with a straight bat, Rosh. If I could throw in an analogy, if I don't know if any of you understand that, but it's playing with a straight bat is a cricket term. When you play with a straight bat in cricket, you're much likely to hit the ball and not get out.
We do like our cricket.
And what about, Lee? I might just ask another question, a little bit related to what Mateus talked about before. What with the government side of things, what's like security clearances and things like that, and are there regularly, you know, any requirements, you know, to have an Australian partner or be based in Australia? Have you come across many of those kind of incidences?
Brendan, I wouldn't say myself. There is actually I mean, I do see it quite often. I don't bid on a lot of, say, Australian defence contracts, for example. I'm not certain around some of the sensitivities. Ross, you might be better, or there might be someone else that we can get on from a defence perspective that can talk more about that. But certainly, I think data sovereignty and those types of things is also another thing, Brendan, that on especially some of the government contracts, they want to make sure that data is essentially hosted here in Australia. So, you know, I work in the IoT space and monitoring space. So quite often there's a lot of government assets like critical highways and bridges and things like that, that they'll want some certainties around data sovereignty. So they want to make sure that the data is hosted in Australia. And that's something to be aware of as well. Not everything, but I know I've worked on a number of projects where, you know, particularly the departments of main roads or transport will want to see that. But yeah, security clearance is probably more a defence thing, Brendan, and I wouldn't be in a position to really state too much about that one. I would assume they'd be a bit sensitive on what went offshore.
That's great. Thank you for those thoughts. I think that's something that a lot of the ConnectEO kind of guys are thinking about sometimes, depending on kind of where they're working and those kind of things. So thank you for the thoughts.
Any other questions for Lee?
Hi, Roshni.
Hi, Sandra.
I hope everyone is enjoying the webinar. I just want to make a question based on a long time ago. Our SMEs responded a survey about a survey on business culture. And this is the reason why we had this webinar. This talk. So my question to Lee is based on one of the questions that our SME sent us. And I want just to share it. And was, what are the points to stress on presentations or on discussions we're negotiating with Australians? Like, what are the important points to follow up or to stress out? If that's clear. If that's clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Sandra. I think as I look, I think yeah, I think obviously probably some of the major ones, as I see it, are now around innovation industry. You know, in terms of capability and capacity, I think it's I think at the moment innovation is something that I think everyone has had a bit of a reality check all over the world right now around remote work and smarter ways of doing things. So I would think at the moment, Sandra, if you have a point of difference with innovation or the technology or the services you provide, I think stating that very clearly is something that's looked upon pretty favourably right now. Particularly in Australia, we're undergoing fairly severe labour shortages. Unemployment is at record lows. So a smarter way to do things with fewer people is pretty topical right now. But yeah, I would think probably, Sandra, that's probably the main incentive here in Australia. I think yeah, obviously how that contributes to, you know, the Australian economy is probably a close second, but certainly the innovation piece is highly topical right now.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Lee, thank you so much for your gems of wisdom. You always have them in abundance. Really, really grateful that you've taken out the time to share these with us, and really appreciate all of the insights that you've passed on. Really, thank you.
Pleasure, Rosh, and I wish you all well. And certainly, if I ever bump into you Australia, please look me up. I'd be happy to say good day and make you feel welcome.
Make sure to visit Queensland and visit Lee there. He knows some great breweries that he can take you to.
Thanks, Rosh. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lee. Brilliant. Well, I would now like to jump into a short moment of speed networking that we're going to do. So if you've been to any of the previous trade missions with me in the Australian Trade Mission series, you will be familiar with these very rapid fire sessions that we have running. So what we'll do is we will create some breakout rooms, and there'll be around 4 people in each breakout room. What I'd like you to do is I'll give the rooms 5 minutes, and what we'll do is rotate around for each person. You'll have about 60 seconds, not much longer, to tell us what the most interesting question that's come up for you so far. So, without further ado, I'm now going to sort people into these rooms, and yes, you'll have 5 minutes. Get ready and make sure to unmute yourself and turn your video on, please. Have fun. Hello everyone, welcome back. How are you all? Did anyone have any very thought-promoting conversation in their breakout room? Everybody was really bored and just sat there staring at each other, didn't they? All right, so I really am very excited now to present to you our next speaker. So Giovanna comes to us from the Australian Marine Safety Authority, AMSA, and we're very lucky to have her here with us today. So Giovanna is the advisor for spatial intelligence, and she joined AMSA in June 2010 as an information systems coordinator. She's now part of the AMSA Response Centre, where she provides support to AMSA's marine domain awareness and pollution response situational awareness. She manages the development and implementation of various information systems and tools, including the National Environmental Maritime Operations System, or NEMO, because Nemo has now been found. I bet you get that all the time. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I love dad jokes. And the Domain Awareness Information System, or DAIS. She also provides mapping support during pollution incidents and various parts of AMSA. So Giovanna, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Roshni. So NEMO is a fun system that we tried to find a really maritime acronym to put into for the system, and it is based on not on the Disney Nemo, is more on the Jules Verne Nemo, Captain Nemo rather. But yeah, sorry, my presentation is a little bit impromptu. I was, just threw some slides together. I wasn't sure what exactly you wanted to find out what we do, but I thought maybe things geospatial, anything that we use in terms of mapping and what we're about. So I'm just going to run the presentation. So I'm not sure how I'm sharing my screen. Hang on. Hopefully.
There should be a little green.
Let me know when it comes up.
Okay. On its way, it's thinking. Just keep swimming.
Oh, hang on. Share. I'm gonna press share.
Perfect. We've got it now. Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. So, like I said, I was going to just show what some of the tools that we use to support our business. So, AMSA is mainly about a logo at the bottom there, safe and clean seas and saving lives. So basically ensuring ship safety of everyone on the ship, maintaining clean seas, avoiding pollution, preventing pollution, and dealing with pollution when that happens. And the very important one that we do is saving lives. So I'm not sure how much you know about AMSA, but we have the AMSA Response Centre that has the Rescue Coordination Centre, where we coordinate search and rescue around the country. And well, not so much around the country, but our whole search and rescue region, which I'll show in a minute. So we are about navigation safety, and we, as part of that, we maintain a network of aids to navigation all around the coastline. So this includes lighthouses, beacons, and any device that helps for safe navigation of vessels. Another big one is we have access to automatic identification system from vessels, so we know where every large vessel is at any one point in time, and there's a reason for that, which I'll explain later. And the other one that we use to support navigation safety is Reef VTS, or the Vessel Traffic Service along the Barrier Reef. So like I said, marine pollution and preparedness and response is another big task that we do. So in the event of a large oil pollution event, we have contracts and personnel that help us respond to that. And we run a lot of training exercises throughout the year. We have collaboration arrangements with state partners that we then have a pool of resources that we call upon for when a big incident happens. And lastly, search and rescue. I'm just going to show you firstly the area that we deal with for search and rescue. So this is in red, the search and rescue region, which is a tenth of the world's surface. It's quite a big area, and as you would have probably heard of the MH370 incident, the area that they were searching was within our region. So we had a big part during that search. And you can see here that a lot of the shipping Australia is very important in terms of shipping. We get 1/10 of the world's shipping coming through our shorelines. So you can see it's a very busy part of the world. Navigation safety, like I said, reef vessel traffic services along one of the busiest routes for vessels is along the Barrier Reef. That area is very heavily trafficked by these large ships that we have quite a few significant ports along the coastline. So that area is very, very closely monitored. So any vessel that veers off the track where they should be navigating through the channels, there's a system in place to detect any anomalies and deal with that any issue with the vessel at that point. And the other one is at the top here in the Torres Strait, where the navigational channel there is very shallow and very subject to very complex tides. And so the vessels that have very low clearance, they need to navigate the waters when there's the tides are right. So all that is very tightly monitored. One of the tools that we use for when vessels drift, so when the vessel breaks down and starts drifting, they can eventually hit something and then spill oil and cause environmental pollution. So for that, we have a vessel drift modelling that we had created by the Danish Hydrographic Institute. And basically that's to model the trajectory of a drifting vessel to see where it's anticipated that it will hit. So this is a tool that we use to plan how we can deal with that vessel that's drifting. So arrange tugs that will help contain the vessel or to anchor it and to predict whether it's going to hit coastline or a reef or anywhere like that. So here on the top right-hand corner, you can see an example of a model that we've run and just showing the predicted areas between a high confidence and low confidence area of where it could drift. So here's an example of what it would look like animated. And the concentric circles show the probability of where that vessel might be. So the way the tool works is it takes into account the shape of the large vessel. This is only for large vessels, by the way. It takes the consideration the shape, the load on the vessel, whether it's a container ship, whether it's got cargo, whether it's very, the shape of the hull, everything like that, the weather, the wind, everything has influence in how the vessel is going to drift. So all that information is fed into the model, and then you run the model and it gives you a prediction like that. We have a similar tool for oil trajectory modeling as well. So when a vessel has started to spill oil, for it's hit something and so the hull is broken, we run a modeling tool similar to this from another service provider, and then you can predict where the oil is going to impact, if it's going to hit certain shorelines, if it's going to dissipate, go somewhere else. And so that way we can target all the cleanup equipment and personnel to that specific location. Another tool that we have available online is a web-based information system where we have all the AIS vessel locations. It's semi-live, so you log into the system and you can see the locations of all the vessels within quite a large range around Australia. So these are for Class A and Class B vessels. So Class A vessels are the very large vessels that travel internationally, container ships, cargo vessels, tankers. And Class B are more the commercial fishing vessels and smaller vessels that they don't necessarily have to have their AIS transponder on, but most of the times they do. So Class A vessels always have to have their location known. So the system accesses a series of AIS data feeds. We have currently a contract with a satellite AIS data provider that feeds that information to us. And then we also have a network of stations around the coastline where we get terrestrial station-based AIS data. So that data then feeds onto a data management tool called Maritime. That data is then sent to a aggregator or craft tracking service module, which then combines sources of AIS from other providers. So we can have long-range information from some of the longer-range vessels, location information from self-located marker buoys that we throw during a search and rescue mission, and some also from Queensland Fisheries to locate some of their fishing vessels. Then that gets processed by the CTS aggregator and sent to a system called Nexus, which is our search and rescue platform that we use, and I'll show you in a minute about Nexus. The other data feed then goes to DAIS, which I explained just earlier. So the vessel location information that you saw before goes in this system. And this system also grabs information for each of the vessels based on deficiencies, detentions, and incidents that the vessels have been involved in. So when you click on a vessel in DAIS, you'll be able to get all that information, not just the location and the time of where the vessel has been located. And so this tool is accessed by quite a few users, both AMSA and external. Now, external users are usually the marine pilots that pilot the vessels in the Great Barrier Reef. And there's also some of the ports that access this information from DAIS. So just as an example here, you click on any vessel that you see as a red triangle, and you get details about the vessel itself, where it's heading, the type of vessel it is, any pictures that show what the vessel looks like, and the last location and point that was detected from the satellite. The other thing you can use this tool for, and this is very important, is that we can grab the track of that vessel for a certain period of time back in time. And then, so if we need to locate, say, where that vessel has been, we can see that on the screen. So here's an example of a track of a particular vessel right there. And this is also a tool that we use for doing a search and rescue incident where we want to find vessels in the vicinity of where, say, someone has been lost at sea. We can then communicate with the vessels around that point to say, can you keep a lookout for, we've got a missing person in the water around this location. So this is one of the tools that we can use for that. So like I said, a lot of the users are marine pilots that use it for their locating other vessels that have pilots on board. Maritime Assistant Service Duty Officers. So when there's a vessel that's drifting, they can then see what the situation is in DAIS. And environmental pollution duty officers as well use it for the same purpose as a situational awareness tool. And one of the other things that we've been looking at, in not so much now at the moment, but we had a contract with Kongsberg in Norway, satellite image provider, to provide us with an oil spill monitoring and detection service. So basically pinpointing a few areas of risk around Australian waters, and then getting snapshots of those areas now and again to see whether oil has been detected. We've ran that for a few years, but then we discontinue it because of the huge costs that provides, and it's just waters around Australia are quite an extensive area, so it was quite a bit of a project to undertake and to maintain for that purpose. But there was a lot of anomalies that were detected, or valid oil and water, for example, from some of the offshore platforms. There's usually small amounts of oil that is shown in the water, and this is an example of where it was picked up. So I've got an offshore platform right there. So the AMSA Response Centre, it's basically, it's like I said, they coordinate search and rescue of missing people at sea. One of the big things that we focus on as well is the detection of emergency beacons. So these are the EPIRBs and personal locator beacons, and the beacons that are on aircraft. So when these get activated, we access a network of satellites called COSPA-SAT that we then, we get the signal coming into the centre, and then we're able to, based on that location, start coordinating a search and rescue activities. So we have a contract of aircraft of 3 jets that provide aerial detection of visualization of people at sea. So they take off from 3 points around Australia, and then they'll go and quickly get to the location and see if they can locate people. And they're fitted with some high-tech equipment for detection of infrared imagery. So they have infrared imagery on board. They have radar sensors and anything to assist finding someone at sea. They're also used for oil pollution and observation. So when we have a large incident, they can go and provide aerial surveillance and detection of how large the extent of the oil is. So for search and rescue, we have a tool called Nexus, which is a tool, an incident management system that was built in-house. And through there, we log all the incidents, all the communications, phone calls relating to each of the incidents that we respond to. So we have just on the system itself, part of that is a series of different spatial layers to help us respond. So seafarer charts, nautical charts, topographic maps, and other vector layers, boundaries, administration boundaries, and areas of responsibility as well. It also has an inbuilt water drift tool, so you're able to, for example, if someone's lost at sea, you can see the drift model of where they could have potentially drifted to, and then based on that you create a search area for the aircraft to then go and do the search. We also deploy with the jets a self-located data marker buoy that then creates, starts to predict some of the drift. So it's just to verify that the drift modelling is doing the right thing. So here in red, you can see some of the tracks of these marker buoys that we deploy out. So yeah, so the tool is basically for records management as well. So if we need to go back and refer to a particular incident and how we've performed that incident, we can go and track every single message and every single record that we've created. So this is just a quick example of how the drift modelling tool works. So in this case, there was a missing yacht out in the northern part of Australia, and so because we sometimes don't know the condition of the boat itself, whether it was taking water or not, we run 2 models in this case. So the red one based on a vessel that is not taking water, so it's floating, and another vessel in pink that was taking in water. So the two different, so if it's got water on board, if it's getting flooded, it would react differently in water. It's going to drift differently than if it wasn't swamped. So we run the two models just to get the complete picture, and then based on that full extent of the model, we'll create the search area that we need to go and search for. And this is just showing the how we communicate with the satellites to when we have an ELT on board an aircraft, and it's an emergency located beacon on board an aircraft. Personal locator beacons and EPIRBs, they'll activate and then be detected by the COSPAS SARSAT constellation of satellites. And then based on that, we get the signal back to our center, and then we coordinate search and rescue activities based on that. So AMSA also registers all the beacons. So if you have a beacon yourself, you have to go into the AMSA website and register your details with the about the beacon. So that means that if we detect a particular beacon, then we can go and then check for the contact information and then follow up whether the beacon was activated accidentally or it was a genuine search and rescue and emergency. And then we follow up actions from that. We get a lot of accidental activations where people have an EPIRB on board their boat and they're washing their boat, and because they're activated by water most of the time, they'll activate, or they'll be disposed of at the rubbish tip, and then it will activate when there's activity, when there's bulldozers over it in the tip, and they will activate the signal. So we get a lot of those accidental activations, but a lot of the times they're genuine. Well, that's pretty much it from myself. I'm not sure if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. Do we have any questions from anyone?
Thanks, Giovanna. I thought that was really interesting stuff. Can you make any comment on like the balance of automation of those kind of services versus the requirements to have people involved in them?
What do you mean automated?
So systems? Like you've got lots of different applications there and lots of different systems running. How much of them do you arrive at a decision or an insight purely in an automated fashion, or do you always need some like a person in there interpreting data, I guess is my question.
Yeah. So these tools help us with the decision making, so we're not relying fully on it. It's, for example, the drift modeling, there's always room for error for any modeling, because you're relying on the underlying currents and wind information. And so you need someone to interpret that information when you derive the model and understand what you're looking at, but also with in the back of your mind thinking that it's not 100% accurate. Yeah, so there's always, you always need that human factor to help interpret the information you've got at hand. And so we also look at other things that we have available for us, like vessel locations and any other aircraft of opportunity that we might have in place. So if we're conducting a search for someone overboard, then we'll notify a lot of the vessels in the vicinity to keep an eye out for anything or anyone lost at sea or a vessel that's missing. But yeah, so there's always that human element that you need.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Brendan, I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, certainly, go one.
Thank you. So nice to meet you. Giovanna, Juan Peña from Orbital EOS.
Oh, yes.
So very Yeah, very interesting presentation, really. Yes, so my questions are related to your role. I was involved in the Spanish Coast Guard for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
First, have you ever tried the use of optical satellite imagery in oil spill detection?
We had a while ago when we had a large incident off the Timor Sea, the Montara oil spill incident from that well. I understand, I wasn't at AMSA at the time, but I understand there was a lot of optical imagery captured from which imagery was it? It was a very coarse resolution imagery, but it wasn't very detailed.
Okay.
Yeah,
MODIS, maybe? MODIS from NASA. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one was at the time we had a contract with Dornier Aircraft, the twin propeller aircraft, to go and collect line scans in infrared and UV. So a lot of line scans were created, flown, and just to see the outline of where the oil was. But there was a lot of imagery processing involved in that and very time consuming. So it wasn't probably the right technology at the time. But with oil, by the time you process the imagery, you assess it, the oil has moved. And so you're going to have to start looking at quicker technology to keep up with that. But yeah, so we don't have a lot of this capability at the moment. And if we were to have a large incident, we would rely on Department of Defense, who have a big program on satellite imagery for emergency response. So they actually provided a lot of the imagery for MH370 back in 2014. Yeah, so and in-house we don't have a big GIS team. There's only 3 of us, and we do different roles around the building, so we're quite light on that respect. But so yeah, so like I said, we access that capability from other agencies. And the last one that we assisted with, even though it was international, was the Solomon Trader spill in Solomon Islands. It was a few years ago. And they flew drones to capture just static optical imagery over the vessel, so just drone based. But the problem with that is that the images are so large, they were hard to transmit quickly to other people overseas, assess the spill. And so, yeah, so I think the technology needs to be quite fastly acquired and processed in order to be useful.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, so just to share with you some of our experiences, we are using now optical satellite imagery for different stakeholders. For instance, in Middle East. For me, the most interesting part is that in Australia, you almost have no clouds. So the potential of using optical satellite imagery is immense. Another interesting thing for me is also that when using optical, you can be 100% conclusive of what you are detecting. This is oil and it's not anything else. And that for me, it's a breakthrough. A second question would be, have you ever used satellite imagery for search and rescue operations?
Now, yeah, with search and rescue, the problem that we have is that we are most of the time doing a search over a very large area. And so to pinpoint a specific area and balance the footprint with the resolution is a bit tricky. We looked into that, and that's the problem we found. In order to, I mean, if you're looking for a person, satellite image, you find it.
No way. No way.
It has to be a vessel. So, I mean, how big this vessel has to be in order for it to be detected at a reasonable resolution? Yeah, that's the question. So you can look for a larger area, but then you might not be able to see the vessel you're looking for. And a lot of the times vessels that we're looking for are small yachts or recreational vessels. So yeah, that was the dilemma that we were facing with, and also, you know, if you needed to task a satellite within a very large area, you have the time of when the satellite's overhead, the processing time. So, and in the meantime, the search area is increasing more and more, and so you end up with a larger area than you began with. So, yeah, we considered that, but it's, when you're looking for a person in particular, it's not going to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for instance, we have this dream of satellites helping in search and rescue operations. Really, not theoretically, and we experience also these very large search and rescue operations here in the Mediterranean or in the Canary Islands, where you have to find small boats with 20 or 30 people on board. And huge area. So aircraft is definitely the technology to that. But we were thinking about using satellites in order to discard positives, you know. For instance, if when we were searching for small boats in the coast of Morocco, north of Morocco, there were thousands of fishing boats that were not the targets. And that implied, you know, aircraft going to that spot all the time, and then this is not what we're looking for. This is a fishing boat and so on. So maybe in this kind of maybe 2-3 days operations where the use of an aircraft can be very, very hard, maybe satellites can help. But of course, we can discuss this in another call. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to find out more.
Thank you.
Matthias, I saw you had a question in the chat as well. A question for you, Giovanna. What other sensors apart from SAR do you use to locate people or vessels in the water? A little bit of a follow-on from that kind of discussion.
So on the aircraft itself, so we have 3 Challenger jets, one in Cairns, one in Essendon, Melbourne, and one in Perth. And so in the aircraft itself, I don't have a slide showing you that, but they have a FLIR, so sensor that is able to pick up heat. So if you're able to see a person out in the water, the person obviously is going to be warmer than the surrounding water, so you'll be able to quickly spot it through that system. And also that the FLIR system is able to pinpoint someone in the water at a very long distance away. So, and it's able to automate the, I don't know, it's able to pick up a shape in the water that far away. Yeah, so they also have, I think, a radar line scan where you're able to pick up oil as well, but I don't think they use it very much. But yeah, the infrared is the most important tool that we use to locate people.
Great.
And also aerial observers. The other thing is that aerial observers probably have a bit more of an understanding what they're looking for. So the aircraft is fitted with really big windows on each side for them to go and locate people, see if they can spot them.
Thank you. Matthias from Crapworks, did you have any other question to kind of build on your earlier question there about different sensors for vessels in the water and so forth?
Yeah, just like wondering, because we have been testing with thermal cameras and looking at the sea, and we don't really see much. And I wonder, like, maybe the reason is that the water here is just so much colder, and if there is anybody in the sea,
yeah,
the body parts will also be quite cold quite quickly, and or maybe you just have a very powerful thermal camera.
Yeah, so in combination with that, we have a doctor who's actually giving us advice on how long a person can be at sea. So they do an assessment of when the person was first or last seen until you know, how far into the future they're able to survive under those conditions in that area. And then after that time period elapses, then the search is called off because there's no possibility of the person surviving under those conditions. But in the meantime, if they can go and find the person, even with the cameras they have on board, their heat sensors, I guess they've tried to search for them. And with that, they also use the search drift modeling that I showed you earlier to then start creating the search based on that. So it's just a targeted search area, so they can start somewhere.
And maybe if you're still in Pedro as well from Space City, how do you see the things that Giovanna has presented there in relation to some of the SAR work that you've done before?
Is it on?
Excuse me. I was just I saw Pedro from Space City still on the list.
Oh, okay.
But he might not be able to hear us right at the moment.
Yeah.
Juan, what about from your perspective? You mentioned the visible before. Are there any other thoughts that you have around, you know, the kind of things that you work with, the data that you work with in your oil spill kind of mapping that related to Giovanna's couple of slides about oil spills?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon, for the comment. So in our experience, the combination of multispectral and SAR gets the best of both worlds. So you get the best results using SAR and optical. So for instance, in our experience, SAR provides you, there is a potential oil spill here, this is the position, this is the area, but nothing else. You have optical, there is an actual oil spill here. We can map the thickness, we can quantify the oil if you know how to, of course. But of course you can't see at night, or you can't see through the clouds. So combining both in our experience is the best, has the best results for different use cases, not only big emergencies, but also law enforcement, like detecting bilge dumping, illegal discharge from ships, also potential leaks from oil rigs at sea, or oil ships, or leaks from underwater pipelines. We've done some extensive works in the Middle East and Gulf of Mexico. And we are very, very passionate about also using new sensors. So there are a bunch of guys there working using thermal infrared, which would be very, very interesting, especially for night detection of oil spills. Yeah, so I think we have a promising future here.
Yeah, we also, Juan, we get a lot of reports of discolored water around the northern part of Australia mainly. Oh, it's actually in many parts, but usually a lot of the reports come from the northern waters of Australia, and they tend to be algal and, you know, natural phenomena. So they look quite dramatic when someone spots them and say, well, it looks like a large spill, but then on a closer look, just, you know, it's clear that it's just algal. So I'm assuming that when you have imagery over an area like that with that discolored water, you'll be able to pick up that it's not oil. So the radar might not be able to pick it up as oil, but the multispectral image might be able to see that it's something there, but not oil. So you might be able to discriminate these reports out.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the discussions we have with people that maybe they're not familiar with this kind of technology, or, you know, satellite images, like satellite pictures, I can use them and detect. Well, it's like when a doctor is seeing an X-ray image, I have no capacity to interpret what's there. You need a lot of experience, a lot of years of experience. So, and some background in oceanography as well. So you need to understand how ocean behaves. and what are the different ocean phenomena that you can find. So we put our efforts there. So, I mean, in our team, we all have oceanography and remote sensing background in the interpretation of imagery. For us, AI is a tool, but a tool that has been trained by an expert, not by a computer programmer, in a sense. So yes, we put a lot. I mean, we experienced this in our work in the Coast Guard. I actually worked in the aircraft, so we were deployed after satellite detection to confirm what the satellite detected, and many times it was just natural phenomena. So having been involved in this, we put a lot of effort in having high confidence in the detection. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because I know that a lot of the service provider that provided that service for us, they said that there's a lot of automation of detecting for anomalies on an image, but then at the end, there's always someone actually interpreting whether it is natural or not, or it could be or not oil. So you've got the human element doing the interpretation for you, not just machine.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
For I don't know for other applications, but for this, it's not that the AI will entirely substitute humans. Not yet. Yeah. I mean, there's a long way to go, especially in the quality check. Okay, of course we can leverage on AI to do our work easier and more agile and faster, but there's always a human expert supervising. Yes.
Yeah. I'll be interested to find out more about that capability, and in terms of search and rescue, we're very interested in that as well, particularly that.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for that bit one. Daniel from Mayday, you said you've got a couple of questions. Might have time for those, and then we might pass back to Rosh to lead us on. But Daniel, please ask your questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon, and thanks for the interesting overview, Giovanna. I have two questions which are a little bit related to your mandate and using geospatial. The first one is about emissions. Like you mentioned, you're inspecting different vessels coming in, and I was wondering if you also use any geospatial technology for air emissions. So what is being burned on the ships, let's say, in this or the other way? And yeah, please.
Oh no, so you mean how to detect whether the vessels are complying with the emissions release?
Correct.
No, we're not doing anything like that. No. Like I said, not quite there yet in terms of technology, using technology to do that kind of complex analysis. But I know that in some countries, I think in Europe or somewhere, they were doing some using satellite imagery to detect the type of emissions that are coming from vessels. I'm not sure if someone can shed a light on that, but no, we're definitely not doing that here in Australia. The only thing we're doing is
yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. The only thing we're doing is just when we board a vessel to inspect it, then they have to inspect whether they're using the right converters in their systems, they're using the right fuels and that kind of thing. That's the only thing that they check for.
Okay, that's interesting. I just it is a bit of link to a discussion which we had to a port authority here in Europe these days, and they're actually using drones which they fly constantly over the port to actually see what pollutants get emitted. But we talk here about air, not water. So yeah, that's maybe also an avenue to think about. But the other question I had is also with respect to illegal fishing. Do I understand well that this falls outside of your mandate, that there's a different Australian institution dealing with that?
Yeah, so for illegal activities, I guess with fishing is more a question for the Fisheries Management Authority. They monitor compliance of fishing vessels. The other one is Border Force, so Department of Defence. Yeah, they deal with illegal activities. So they also have systems that are a bit more secret than ours, I suppose, that look for illegal activity out at sea, and also looking for anomalies. Anything, for example, a lot of vessels, if they stop transmitting their AIS, they will let us know about it. So they'll say, oh, hey, there's this vessel here has stopped transmitting AIS. So then we may follow up with the vessel. We'll contact the vessel directly and say, well, what's happening with your vessel? So they have systems in place to look for anomalies like that. And a lot of that is to do with illegal activities, drug runs and that kind of thing. But yeah, with fishing, fisheries, it's more the Fisheries Management Authority is not part of our mandate. So if it involves an issue of search and rescue or safety at sea, then that's our mission. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks for those questions all, and thanks, Giovanna, for such an interesting presentation. I think it's
that's okay. I tried to cram as much as I could in the 15 minutes. Very brief.
I think you'll find a willing audience. If you want to talk about this anymore, I'm sure there's a bunch of people on here who will talk about this for as long as you care to. So thank you very much for giving us that presentation today. Really, really interesting.
That's okay. Welcome.
Rosh, I might pass back to you.
Absolutely. Giovanna, thank you so much. That was really fantastic, and our audience was so engaged. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who is our final speaker for today, and will be furthering the continuation about business culture. So you might notice that this is a bit of a change in the program. I'd like to introduce Dr. Laura Kostansky. Laura leads teams to design creative solutions for complex technical, social, and environmental systems. She loves navigating deep problem spaces with a robust mix of critical thinking and innovative problem-solving methods. She's been around the traps in the Australian geospatial industry for over 15 years. She has a lot of experience facilitating and coaching, and she is passionate about delivering opportunities for technical experts and creative thinkers to come together and implement novel cross-disciplinary approaches. So Laura, welcome to the ConnectEO Australia Trade Mission Day 3. Thank you so much for stepping in to cover the change in program that we had last minute, and nice glasses.
Thank you. Thanks, Roshni. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to say hello, good evening to everyone who's online. It's lovely to meet you. I can also say bonjour. It's not bonsoir if you're in a francophone country. And I'm not sure where everyone is from across Europe, but it's great to meet you. I can't see any of you because you've all got your cameras off, but I assume that you're all there and can hear and see me while I'm chatting away. I think a few of you are now putting your cameras on. Yay! This is even better. Okay, great. Hi, Daniel. Hey, Etor. Lovely to meet you. Thanks for putting your cameras on. It's so much better to actually talk to people's faces while we're doing this. And then I get a bit of a feel for who's here. I assume Juan and Sandra and Beatrice and Matthias and Pedro are also online and listening. I do know that I'm the last to speak, so I do completely appreciate if you are all quite tired after all the amazing learnings you've been having so far. What I am going to do is share my screen with you, because having lived overseas myself, having lived in France for a while, I understand how much it can be very helpful at the end of a very long day to have a few visual cues about whatever the person is speaking about on a screen. So I did whip these together very quickly, so I apologize that they are just words on the screen. So I've been asked to talk about the culture of innovation in Australia. And before I get underway, I would like to acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians that I'm meeting on tonight. I live in a place called Naarm, which you might also know as Melbourne, and it's the traditional lands of the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And one of the things I did want to talk to you about tonight is the acknowledgement of country and how that works here in Australia. So tonight I will talk with you about the 3 C's of culture, connection, and collaboration. I couldn't think of the C to go with innovation trends, so we just have to go with innovation trends. I'm very sorry. Maybe someone who's really smart online tonight can think of something that I could wrap it up to be the 4 C's. But anyway, Giovanna, you were just talking about C's before, but a different kind of C, I guess. So in terms of culture, let's get into that. The acknowledgement of country is a very, very important thing that we commence our meetings with in Australia. The acknowledgement of country is something that is undertaken by people who are starting a meeting or coming into a meeting to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the particular land that they are on. Now, when I say people, I mean people who are on a country that they are not personally associated with or from themselves, when they are not an Indigenous or person or Torres Strait Islander from that particular place. There's a lot more that I could say in regards to acknowledgements of country and welcome to country, but it's not my place in particular. So I would actually point you to a few reference sources that you can have a look at. In fact, there's a really great TEDx video that I was watching this afternoon, funnily enough, at TEDx 21 in Sydney. If you type in acknowledgement of country TEDx Sydney 2021, you'll find an excellent speaker talking about acknowledgement of country and welcome to country, how it works, why it's very important, and how you can develop your own personalized acknowledgement of country for a meeting. It's a way of paying respect to the 70,000 years of care that our traditional custodians have had for the lands and the waters of Australia that we have the privilege of living on, working on, and raising our families on. And a way of paying that respect and acknowledging that at the start of every meeting is a very, very important thing to do in Australia. I can see everyone searching for the TEDx. Don't watch it now. It goes for 8 minutes, but it's a good thing to have a look at to get familiar with how we start our meetings in Australia. Something else to remember in terms of how we work here is that we have 3 levels of government. And I don't know about Brandon, but I reckon with Roshni, we totally appreciate, and Brandon, you probably just nod your head on this one. They all have different levels of approvals, legislation, regulation, ways of working. So at the Commonwealth level, they have a certain set of decisions and rules and laws that can get made. Within the states, it's exactly the same thing, just different rules and different laws. And then the states and the Commonwealth are meant to work together on certain things and not on others. And pretty much everything else falls to local government. Now, Roshni's going to have to remind me, I think after recent amalgamations, there's something like 78 local governments in New South Wales.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, 78 local governments.
As though each state within Australia is its own country. That's how it feels sometimes.
Pretty much. And we very much felt that during the past 2 years. So by way of explanation for everyone who's here right now, during the past 2 years, each state and territory had their own rules around what would happen with COVID and lockdowns. Every single thing was different. And all the borders of our states got closed to each other at various points as well. I could literally not travel from Melbourne to Sydney to see Roshni because they're different states, Victoria and New South Wales. So we've spent 2 years not seeing each other. We caught up a month ago, which was lovely, for the first time in a very, very long time. In addition to that, 78 local governments in New South Wales, 55 of them or so in Victoria, and so many local governments to deal with. And ultimately, the reason this is important for you to understand in the spatial industry, the very important reason to understand this in the spatial industry, is local governments are the ones who, at the start of a process, are involved in urban planning, involved in environmental protection, are involved in all that early mapping process in terms of roads and infrastructure and everything else under the ground. Then on top of that, the states and territories have their regulatory frameworks, which inform how the local governments do these things. That they themselves have their own rules, their own processes, their own systems. Then on top of that, you have the Commonwealth, which tries to bring together national pictures of how things are working. So if you want to know where and how to work in Australia in the spatial industry, you need to really understand those 3 levels of government and try and work out which of them might be responsible for what you're looking at doing. Something else to be aware of is, just like Europe, multiple time zones and different public holidays. We all like to be uniquely unique and just go on holidays at our own random times across Australia. And there's a 3-hour difference during summer and during daylight savings. There's a 3-hour difference between where Sydney is and where Perth is. So there's a huge amount of time zone differences just across Australia. In addition to that, really important to appreciate we're a multicultural society. And so it can be really hard to define, to some degree, some rules of etiquette or other things that might be appropriate in different contexts that you come into. What's very important to understand is the acknowledgement of country and understanding the multiplicity of types of people you might engage with in any situation before you step into those rooms. But that's something that you can do a bit of research on before you start up conversations. Before I move on to talking about how you can start to connect and collaborate with people, does anyone have any questions about what I've been talking about with culture? Makes complete sense. Has anyone been in a meeting where there's been an acknowledgement of country before? Apart from the one I just gave?
Yeah, in our meetings, so we have a stand-up brief 3 times a week, and every time we have an acknowledgement to country. Yep. Great. Is that a standard one, or is it something you've developed over time? Oh, it's just a standard one. Yeah, we just got the same blurb. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Have you been practicing? No, I don't really run the meetings. I don't chair it. So yeah, whoever's chairing it at the time usually reads it out. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll assume that makes sense to everyone. Now, in terms of connecting, LinkedIn, obvious, easy place to start. In all the training that I provide to researchers here in Australia, I can't emphasize enough how much they underestimate the power of LinkedIn for connecting with people. I really suggest that's a great place to go and try and find out who's where and what they're doing. What's also really helpful is we have different chambers of commerce in Australia who specialize in various topics or various kinds of collaboration as well. So
something to do a bit of research into is to have a look at what kind of chamber of commerce there might be for what you're researching or applying your skills to, and see if they already have various programs that you can get involved with to connect you with people here in Australia, obviously above and beyond to, these sessions that you're attending. Then we also have various professional organisations. In the spatial industry, we have SSSI and SIBA. I'm going to defer to Roshni to talk about what these are for you.
Thanks, Laura.
No problem.
So SSSI and SIBA are the two, I guess, national advocacy bodies that advocate for, provide resources, provide networking opportunities, provide certification, provide events for members and non-members, so webinars that are available online, as well as some face-to-face events slowly coming back. So SSSI is the Surveying and Spatial Sciences Institute. SIBA is the Spatial Information Business Spatial Industry Business Association. So SSSI is for individual members, and SIBA is for business members, like organizations. And so both of them have websites. I think there's some somewhere in the chat. You can have a look at these. They're a great place to start to understand the landscape in Australia, and also to, if you are interested in looking at membership, some of the member-only events and resources available can be a great way to network and meet other people or find local collaborators and local partners. Attending some of the events can be useful too. And if you also wanted to offer to speak at an event, I'm sure you could get in touch with some of the staff at either of those organizations, and they're always very happy to get ideas to run more different events. So that's another great way to get involved and to meet people locally in Australia. Back to you, Laura.
Thanks, Roshni. We also then have, obviously, our university and research organisations. Something to be really aware of with the universities is they have their own groups too. So there's a select group of universities called the Group of 8. They're the ones with the really high research outputs. They have their own representative organisation as well. So something to look into is the Group of 8. There is other acronyms and other words for other university groupings as well that all just flew out of my head as soon as I mentioned the Group of 8. I am so sorry. It'll come to me, I know, as soon as I stop thinking about it. So bear with me. Something else to consider is we do have a national science research agency called CSIRO. That's where I'm currently employed, yay, but I'm doing this in my own personal capacity. CSIRO is pretty much unlike anything you would find in Europe. It's actually quite hard to find an equivalent internationally. I would essentially call it a national research university that doesn't have students, just has amazing world-leading researchers in it all across Australia. So that's who CSIRO are, and worth connecting with, because our universities and research organisations and CSIRO themselves have their own innovation programs specifically for their researchers and their research partners. So if you have a look at their websites, type in the word innovation program, you can potentially usually find what their strategies are, where they're willing and looking to invest their time and energy, etc., etc. So that can be a good place to start as well. In terms of collaboration, if you haven't picked it up tonight already, we're very informal. I am terribly informal person. It actually really hurts me if I have to be formal, although I have been very formal in the past, having been a delegate to the United Nations and being very familiar with those kinds of protocols. I would have to say, on a scale of being at the United Nations compared to being on a weekend camping with your family, Australia would be on the scale of being on a weekend camping with your family compared to being at the United Nations when you're collaborating and engaging with people generally. We prefer to be informal most of the time, with certain boundaries around that as well. Informal doesn't mean, well, informal means you still speak respectfully, that you still engage with good intent as well, and that you, how do I say this, that you speak truthfully and honestly in every engagement too. So just something to keep in mind though, is that generally in Australia, decisions won't happen in a meeting room. People will prefer to have dialogue outside a meeting room, over a coffee, over dinner, through multiple different kinds of conversations, to really get a feel for who you are, to understand your background, to understand what you're bringing to the table, and to test whether they can really trust you. Once those informal kind of conversations have happened, then you're really much more likely to end up in those formal meeting rooms where things get signed off. But in the meantime, it's those informal connections in between the formal meetings that are really important in Australian business culture. I don't know what else to add into that, except to say that we use Australian English. It is its own officially recognised language as such. We do have an Australian English dictionary. You can turn Australian English on in Microsoft. It exists, I promise you. The best way to describe it is it's British English. So for those of you in Europe who've learnt English from a British English speaker, you'll be pretty much fine. If you've learnt your English from an American English speaker, then there'll be some differences. Main differences are spelling, and in Australia, we like to think that the British English spelling of things is better. I use that term better advisedly because you'll end up in a huge debate with people about it. But we like to have a laugh about some of these things too. But if you're handing over documents to people and you're sending emails and you're connecting via LinkedIn, then it is best to go with British English versions of your spelling and grammar than the American English versions. I won't even ask Roshni or Giovanna for their thoughts on how we spell the word program in government at a Commonwealth level compared to everywhere else, but that's a debate for another time. It either has one M or it has a double M-E, depending on who you talk to. So, okay, any other thoughts from fellow Australians on this chat right now about collaboration and our informal methods of engaging? Brendan's like, yeah, all right.
Yeah. No, I was just going to add, look, I thank you, Laura, for that discussion. I think I just, support what you said around, the outside the boardroom is often as important as inside the boardroom, and that getting to know people and that kind of interaction is an important part of the wider business kind of process, I think. So just that's my only comment to support what you've said there.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, great. Final thing, being in the spatial industry, key things that I know from all the years of working across different areas of the spatial industry, but also having the pleasure of attending and co-facilitating events at Locate with Roshni and a colleague of ours, Dana. We see common themes coming up in strategies and big programs of work here in Australia. There's a huge focus on agriculture at the moment. In fact, for the past 3 years, I've designed and facilitated and run the Australian agriculture innovation program called GATE. It's run by New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and is focused on getting scientific research out of the lab for agriculture. There is a huge push for more innovation in the agriculture domain, and there is so much opportunity for the spatial industry to be involved in that area. Urban planning, land management goes without saying. The things that are big in Europe in terms of urban planning and land management, they're really big here too. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference around the corner from me where we were specifically looking at the threat of fire and what that means. And we had people coming from Europe and talking to us about your changing climate and what it means for your land management practices, in particular for forests and waterways. So those things that you see as trends in Europe are big trends here as well. Transport too, we're a big country. We have diverse transport needs from the urban city to the cross-country stuff. Digital twins are a big topic, lots of investment happening. Interestingly, keep this in mind, at the state level is where the digital twin stuff happens generally. Transport happens at the state level, urban planning and land management, state level, agriculture, Commonwealth level, some state level. Again, they all kind of overlap. Something interesting too, at a national level are standards. There's lots of work going on with standards, metadata, ontologies. A lot of our researchers and science groups and government agencies are involved in Open Geospatial Consortium, et cetera. So always worthwhile thinking through what the OGC and ISO standards are, making sure what you're doing is compliant with where Australia is at internationally as well. And there was various social trends I wanted to pick up on, but I can't remember them right now. It has literally gone out of my mind because it's very late at night. I was going to say something profound, I'm sure, about the social trends. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Okay. We've got our latest census data coming out. Is it tomorrow? I think it's actually tomorrow that the census data is coming out from the Australian Bureau of Statistics for 2021. So that's our 4-year snapshot into what's happening in Australia. What we're seeing is a lot more people taking health data, taking demographic data, enabling it spatially to do really complex analyses of different social trends in Australia. And if that's something that you're working on, then I know there are people here who would love to hear about it, in particular at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So that's what my final part was about. So that was it. That's all I could think of to say. Hopefully it was helpful. Not sure if you have any questions. I'm sure you probably all want to go and have lunch. I think it's probably lunchtime where you are. But thanks.
We absolutely welcome any questions. And thank you so much, Laura. That was fantastic. Very much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Well, that was great. Thank you again, Laura. And
my pleasure.
I'm just noting that we've kind of come up to time here, and a couple of messages in the chat that folks need to step off to other things. I just quickly say thank you to everybody for being here today, and also part of all the other 2 days of this trade mission that we've had as well. So thank you to everybody for being here, and also thank you to all the presenters that we've had, those that are still online today, but also they'll extend that out to everyone who's been talking to us throughout those kind of 3 days. So yeah, again, thank you very much. I hope you found something interesting. Rosh, I'll just pass over to you. Rosh is not there, but you can see just on the screen there.
There we go.
There we go.
Yes, so I wanted to say a big thank you to Laura and to all of our speakers today. A gentle reminder as well that you've got the details in the chat for the Chile trade mission, which is starting very soon. So please follow the link in the chat to register. This is the day 1 program. They're very excited about it, and we hope that you will gain a lot of value from attending as well. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. We are very thrilled that you've spent this time with us, and we hope that you've enjoyed it, learned some useful things. Please do feel free to reach out to us at any time. I'm sure you are all very familiar with my email address, seeing as I've been sending you lots of emails lately. But again, reach out to myself or any of the speakers at any time. And we hope that you have taken away something meaningful, and that you have some gems of wisdom that you will take forth into the world with you. Thank you again, everyone.